Sebastian, welcome to the Compete Everyday podcast.
Jake, thanks so much for having me on, man. I'm so excited.
I have no idea where today is going to go, only because the things that we talked about just before we went on air, as well as the notes that I have right here for today's interview, could take us any number of places. So the listeners are in for a treat. We do have a plan. But before we dive into that, your story, some of the great work you're doing, I'd love if you gave everyone just a quick snapshot of what you do today. And then I kind of want to backtrack on how we got there.
Yeah, man, absolutely. You know what? I love that too. I just signed up for an improv comedy class. So this is going to be a perfect segue into us doing some freestyle. And so,
Yes, and
yeah,
right?
man, I like, yes, and absolutely. I like to actually start with my life purpose. I think for me, it grounds who I am as a person. And my life purpose is creating spaces for full self-expression and play. And the idea behind that is when you've got a really high-performing team, when you look at the Michael Jordan, the decade of dominance he had with the Bulls, you had a Dennis Rodman who had crazy hair color and definitely a different way of being as a teammate. And for him to be able to bring that type of play, that type of true authenticity with the high-performance habits that Jordan set, it was a really magical combination. And I just believe that what happens when we can create really impactful cultures is when we can mirror and mix that high performance aspect with the authenticity. So a lot of my work happens with teams and individuals trying to unlock that play, trying to have more fun as they're playing at a really high level. And I'm working a lot with one-on-one clients in the coaching realm. And then I do a lot of workshops with teams as well. So it's a fun mix.
So I've already got a question before we kind of go into your backstory. So along those lines, let's talk about the teams you work with, the goals you work with. Rodman is a great example. Rodman knew his role with the team. He knew his role in Detroit. He knew I am in the paint. I'm rebounding. I'm doing the dirty work. I'm doing the things nobody else wants to do for the most part. And he was amazing at it. A lot of times for us to have fun, we assume that we have to have the role we want. We have to be the star. A lot of your work is not on that, though. It's learning to take pride and just enjoy what you do, whether you are the person that's in practice every day and your job is to make the starters sweat, or you're that star caliber player. But a lot of us struggle with that transition when we're not in that position we want to be in. And I actually just wrote a post about it this morning. So I'm curious your thoughts on when you're going into teams and working with teams. How do you, one, help individuals become more self-aware of what their actual role is? And then when there is that disappointment, how do we at least start the conversation to move them into a place of more, not only just acceptance, but joy in that process?
Yeah, I love the distinction you're making there between accepting a role versus embracing a role. And you don't always have to accept the role that you might have on a team, but choosing to embrace it is an important distinction that we want to make, especially, as you're dealing with some people that might not be love the position. They're not the starting point guard. They're not the starting quarterback, but being able to embrace your role is a choice. And that's a choice to be a really good teammate. And what I love that you just talked about there is the importance of goal setting. You talked about what the goals of the team and then the goals of the athlete. And I actually think it's important to be able to dispel both, to be able to highlight and define both what are those goals for both people. Because when we ignore the individual, we ignore intrinsic motivation that might be sitting in that individual, that might be necessary for the team. And when we ignore the championship that we're after at the end of the year, or there's certain milestones along the way, division title, so on and so forth, we have to figure out a way to align both those things. So when we can spell out the individual's goals, I want to do X, Y, and Z on the team. Well, how does that align to the overall team's goals? I think it's when you get really dangerous in a good way, and I say that in a good way. You get a really dangerous combination of a team that's really explosive, individual that's on fire, and a team that's on fire, aligning those goals.
Well, and one thing I find fascinating about that is exactly what you just said, the accepting versus embracing, and learning to embrace that role in the moment doesn't mean you're married to it. And a lot of us, and I say that a lot of us, when we start out in business, when we, start with sports, we assume the choice I make on day one is the way I'm stuck forever. Like I can't get out of it. And in reality, you're going to continue to grow and develop. And it's on leaders, those of us in leadership positions, to not only help our team embrace those roles, but wouldn't you say also help them formulate the plan to move up within that role, to go from, hey, if you're the bench guy now, here's what I need out of you in practice. But if you want to be that starter, we need to build X, Y, and Z into your training, into your skill development, into your knowledge base to have a shot at that. Would you say that's kind of where the leader's real role is, not only getting their team to embrace those different roles, but helping them see the bigger picture so that they stay motivated to keep working?
Yeah. I love the acronym APE. APE stands for awareness, plan, and execute. And it's one of the very simple goal models that I've taught for a while now. And the idea of awareness is, where am I now and where do I want to go? You're plotting out the vision of where the team is going. The plan, or the action steps, the question we would ask is, hey, how do we get there? It's the how, the steps we take along the way in our process. And then the E is the execute part. We want to make sure that we're creating environments that allow the default behavior, the positive behavior, to be the default. And as a leader, so much of your job is creating an environment for the APE to be present each and every day. It's reminding your players, hey, where are we going and how are we going to get ourselves there? What are the daily habits, everything from what you're doing in the classroom to what you're doing in pre-game film, that allow you to execute your way through the process and make sure that those big results take care of themselves. So I think the APE is such a big part of bringing that to your daily practice or weekly routine.
One of the things I find fascinating, not only talking to you, but listening to your interviews ahead of time, is you have a very clear focus on, these are the pieces. This is how we start to work them together. And I'm sure your clients can absolutely attest to that. Have you always had that kind of ability to, as Gary Vaynerchuk says, eyes, in the clouds and in the dirt, like be able to see both of those simultaneously? Or is that something you've developed with, your work while you were at Yale or working with McChrystal's group, any of those steps along the way?
You know what? First of all, thank you. The two things that I'll point to there is I take pride in my ability to consolidate. And I think there's this idea that we have to synthesize our environment. We try to pull things in, but ultimately we need to consolidate the things that are going to be most useful to us and then discard the stuff that's not. And part of that is part of my audit process. And it's one thing that I think about a lot when it comes to trying to move faster towards our goals, right? And one of the ways we can move faster towards our goals is if we reduce the friction, usually caused by ourselves, that's in the way. So when we're creating a process of auditing, it's everything that you're consuming on social media. It's everything that you're, all the input and the people that you surround yourself with. We always talk about, the aggregation of the top 5 people you spend the most time with. We've heard that so many times. And when we audit ourselves and we really look at, is this serving my larger purpose? Is this serving where I want to go? It actually makes that decision very simple as a black and white yes and no. And I think what I've been pretty present to is, I know that I'm looking to make a big impact to the world. I know that here are my visions and my pathways to get there. So what are the things that I need to consolidate, keep with me as part of who I am, my value system, my principles? And what are the things that I need to let go? And ultimately that aren't serving me or aren't helping me move further and farther and faster. So those are two things I think when it comes down to how do I keep that vision present, those are two things that I think I do often.
One of the things I heard you talk to your cousin about on a previous podcast is your upbringing and that relationship dynamic with each of your parents, which is very, very different. Do you think that just the process, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I know that you carried a lot of emotional feelings, resentment towards your father, if I'm stating that correctly, and having to work through that process, because leading while carrying baggage is one of those things you just talked, what do I need to let go of? If you don't mind sharing just a little bit of how you internally went through that process of learning to let go of some of that negative baggage that we all carry. We all have jaded relationships. We all have things that didn't work out. We harbor resentment toward people. And for a lot of us, it's hard to let go of, but every time we carry it, it's preventing us from actually leading and being more present.
Yeah, Jake, you know what? I'm really glad you asked, and thanks for the question. And just as a quick, if we go back just with a little bit of history. Yeah. So my dad, drug addict and alcoholic, was out of my life for the majority of my life. I really made the decision my freshman year of high school to really leave that relationship behind me. My mom and my grandma are two wonderful superwomen, and they raised me, and I consider both of them very maternal figures. I've been really fortunate with both of them. So starting there and looking at that question of like, what does it look to leave things in the past? It wasn't easy. And I've done a ton of work on it really the last 2 years in starting to actually dig into that, because when I go back into that vein, there's some pain there. Like I have to be able to pull some things back and look at things that I've either put away for a long time or I've never actually looked at before. And what I've realized is that one of my biggest goals in life is to be a father myself. I know that's something that I've always wanted to do, and I want to be really damn good at it. And if I'm going to be holding on to resentment for that figure in my life, how is that going to translate into the father that I want to be? Knowing that it hasn't happened yet, it's not in the short-term future. However, that being said, if I'm not practicing for what I want tomorrow today, what am I practicing for?
Can I
had to
ask
ask myself that question. Yeah,
I was about to
please.
say, can I ask you what spurred that internal conversation? Because a lot of people, I don't think we ever get to that self-awareness point of connecting those dots. Like if I want to be a father one day and have this relationship, well, then I can't immediately have this. Most people would see it as two distinctly different situations, but you drew the connection piece. Was there something that happened or a conversation that really kind of woke your eyes up to that?
I think the way we do small things is the way we do all things. And when we start to look at our lives as segmented different lanes on a highway, I think we ultimately lose a lot of power. We leak a lot of power from what we're bringing to a space. And what I mean by that is the same way that I go brush my teeth in the morning is the same way that I run my rep on the field, or the same way that I finish a rep, or I mean, you get the kind of the thing that I'm pulling, the thread I'm pulling here. And ultimately, the way in which I was engaging with my relationship there was influencing the way that I was able to love, lean into empathy and compassion in other relationships. And I saw that as something that was holding me back, specifically in my romantic relationships. And I knew that if I wanted to be the type of father, in this case, the type of partner and husband for, this future family, that I needed to let certain things go. And I need to have certain conversations that were going to be very uncomfortable in service of me actually creating that life and creating that family that I wanted for myself. So I think that was I had some really incredible people in college actually that pointed to certain things and just didn't let me get away with talking myself out of it. Because that was one thing that I've done, historically been pretty good at. I can usually weave my way through a conversation. And I had some people that were committed to my breakthrough in this new level of love and trust and intimacy that I'm really grateful for. Yeah, so I had some people in my life that helped.
I love that. And just hearing you kind of tell that story, one, it just reinforces the power of the people we associate with, the thing that we already talked about and who's around us. The second piece is just your self-awareness. And you, as I mentioned earlier, you seem really focused on some right things and really organized in a lot of ways in terms of this is the routine. This is how I do the little things. This is how I go about it. Do you believe that you pick more of that up being an athlete and going through the process of, I've got to make this step, I've got to do this rep, I got to do it? Or would you say it's also during school because you work with General Stanley McChrystal, who is well known for the details and the little things as well throughout that process? Or has it been really sharpened by working with his group?
I'd say all of it. I'd
Okay.
say it started for me. I got a B on a test, a spelling test in fourth grade. And I decided that B's, for me, not for other people, B's are great. For me, B's weren't acceptable. And my standard versus the expectations, and I've been differentiating those words in the way that way has come up in our lives a lot recently, between standards and expectations. And what I decided is that my standards, the way of working, the operating principles that I had for myself, were going to be higher than other people's expectations. And then part of the way that I did that is I started to just pay attention. I started to tune into the people that I respected the most, right? And for me, that was a lot of my coaches. That was some of the upperclassmen, a few of the people that actually I was always chasing their back of their heels. And what I looked at is, what are they doing that I really respect and that's making them great? And then I just started to key in. I started to practice it. And whether it was General Stanley McChrystal, whether it was some of my other teammates at the McChrystal group, other teammates at, Tyler Varga, who went and played for the Colts with Yale football, watching what they did gave me insight into how I could do certain things better. And I just tried to adopt them.
I love that. Well, and I also love how you just refer to your coworkers as teammates, which
Absolutely.
speaks to the culture that is in that atmosphere, because there's a lot of people that would never relate to or respond to calling their coworker a teammate, just due to that culture that's in place. So I really appreciate that and wanted to point that out to those listening, that it was not lost in how you communicate and talk about your team, which I know is all in your wheelhouse with leadership and culture. But one of the things you just mentioned there were your own standards and others' expectations. And if anything, 2020 taught us that expectations and what you expect to happen and what you think is going to happen is going to just change dramatically. And I know you're doing work right now and just kind of sitting in that discomfort and sitting in that mess and everything that's going on. And I think it's such a fitting focus for right now. But for you specifically, as someone who's so organized, who's so focused, where's the mess that you find your own self sitting in? Because you seem like if plan A is not going, I've already got plan B and plan C and plan D already lined up. So we're just going to move down the line. Whereas some people are like, I don't even know what day of the week it is right now.
Yeah, man, I love that. And I'm going to point to a few things right now because it's a practice it's a muscle that I'm starting to work myself. And I haven't figured it all out yet. And that's actually, I think, the beautiful thing about it. I think the first thing was making the decision to jump full time into my own coaching practice, my own coaching and consulting work. And I was at McChrystal Group for about 3 years. I'm still doing some work with them and have a great relationship. But one of the decisions I had to make was, am I going to leave this security when we're talking about potentially an economic recession, a global pandemic, and this global quarantine that we've got going on? Like, is that a smart move to make or not? Right. And by all the expectations, other people's standards, society standards, that's a really dumb decision. And I knew that, right? And I had some incredible input from people that are more traditional and have done really, really well climbing society's standards or society's expectations. But then I kept coming back to the question of, okay, what do I want and what do I need to live in alignment with my values and within my integrity? And it was the idea that I gotta go bet on myself. And I've been talking about it for years, and I finally had to go do it. So there was a mess in that decision process because I wanted to make sure I was doing things the right way. And I think the example that's a little bit even more recent that is where this whole idea of reflecting or embracing or jumping into the mess came from was right after George Floyd. And George Floyd was killed at the end of May, and the world definitely it lit up in a lot of ways. And in early June, my conversation it was uncomfortable. And I'm a biracial Black man in America. I'm half white, half Black. I take a lot of pride in being a mixed race person. And I was getting all these calls from friends and family, people that were curious and that were concerned about how I was doing and how I was coping through all this. And the experience that I had was a really messy conversation around race. And usually I would just hold space for both parties. I'd figure out ways to create harmony. But I had people asking me questions of, hey, as a Black man, what's your thought? What are your opinions? How do you see this whole thing? And I had to really look internally. I've come from a pretty privileged place, Cheshire, Connecticut, pretty privileged, Yale University, pretty privileged, McChrystal Group, pretty privileged. And I had to really ask myself the question, hey man, who are you being in this conversation? Hey, are you Black enough to have this conversation? And I had that conversation with some of my closest Black friends, and I said, "Hey, Seb, you have a voice in here, and we want to hear it." And to ask yourself that question about your racial identity. Again, this happened 6 months ago, right?
Yeah.
To ask yourself those questions about your racial identity, I got more from being able to sit in the silence and the stillness and the discomfort that created. I got more answers for myself there than I did about engaging, which is what I normally do. I usually go to action, I go to doing. And it was in the mess that I learned a lot more about who I was. It was in the mess that I learned a lot more about my racial identity and how it shows up for me. So I think there's so much power. There's so much, the beauty of humanity sits when we can absorb and sit in our own mess. We can learn so much about ourselves and we can reflect on things that we never would have before. But when we fight ourselves, when we're in our own mess, we don't get that same benefit.
Yeah, it's almost like a lot of us just have that initial reaction of this is uncomfortable. I don't like this. I don't want to be here. And it's not even the conversations. Most of us will have those open dialogues, but it's when we have to sit with our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own, what am I thinking? What am I feeling, that we want no part of it. That's why as a culture, we're so obsessed with phones, with TV, with keeping ourselves distracted at all times, whether productivity wise, or whether just binging on Netflix, because a lot of us don't want to sit and have to think about those things. But just as you pointed out, there's massive opportunities for internal growth, for internal self-awareness, sitting just kind of in those thoughts. Do you have a daily gratitude practice or journaling practice that you've started or have done for years that helps you process some of those thoughts?
It's been on and off, because I struggle with the exact same thing you just talked about, of kind of overconsumption and overstimulation. I think I'm absolutely a culprit of that. The thing I've prided myself recently is just my meditation practice. And I've gone the longest streak right now on Headspace, big fan of Headspace, than I have in a long time. So creating that intentional, even 10 minutes per day of being with my own stillness. And I think stillness is what I keep coming back to. I'm reading right now, Ryan Holiday, Stillness is the Key.
Figured that might
And
be the one.
it's been so important for me. And I've had a morning practice of, just, we call it clearing in the coaching world. And the idea is, let's get all the negative self-talk out on a piece of paper. Let's externalize it. And then let's figure out what's real, what's fake. Because oftentimes the things that we say to ourselves is just an interpretation. You can't go to the store and get a cup of, you're a piece of crap. You can't go to the store and go get that. So that process has been a really important one. Clearing gives me the ability to start my day from a really clean platform. And then meditation's been another important practice in my life as well.
I love that. I love that. Well, I was going to ask what you were reading lately, but you've already answered that with Ryan Holiday. Dude, this has been a ton of fun today, and just incredibly insightful to not only your work, but just different perspectives on leadership, on teamwork, on how we see ourselves, and more importantly, how we can learn to show up better in the world. Sebastian, where can people best get connected with you? And obviously, as a man running his own show now, taking the leap to bet on himself, where can people find out more about your work and how to hire you?
Yeah, Jake, thanks so much, man. You can find me on the internet at www.sebastianlittle.com. Very simple one to remember, Sebastian, little as in small, spelled just how it's spelled. On social media, you can find me at SebLittle_ on Twitter and Instagram. I'm pretty much on there every day. I try to have a 24-hour rule of getting back to folks. So if you reach out, I'd love to connect with you as well. So at SebLittle, SEBLITTLE_.
I love it. I love it. And for any of our coaches and leaders listening, go to his website, check it out. Under Insights, he's got a download Coach's Playbook to COVID-19. So I'd highly encourage you to go there, download it, and especially give this guy a follow. He's active online, puts out some great content. Sebastian, man, thanks for joining the show this week.
Jake, absolute pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.